Tonight, we begin with a development that U.S. officials had anticipated, NATO analysts had prepared for, and Western intelligence had tracked for weeks, yet somehow still underestimated in its sheer scale. A shift in momentum that unfolded not over months of grinding attrition, but in 72 devastating hours. 72 hours that shattered Russian logistics across multiple fronts. 72 hours that exposed critical weaknesses in Putin's war machine. 72 hours that fundamentally altered the calculus of this war. What Vladimir Putin attempted this week crossed a line that the White House had hoped would hold, a line between calculated aggression and strategic overreach. And when that line broke, Ukraine did not hesitate. They responded with precision, with speed, and with a devastating effectiveness that has left military analysts around the world reconsidering everything they thought they knew about this conflict. For months now, there had been signals, not from official Kremlin statements, not from diplomatic channels, just signals that Russia was preparing something unusual. Putin has been aggressive, yes, but he has been methodical in his aggression. His moves have followed a certain rhythm, a predictability, almost a doctrine that Western intelligence has learned to read. But what set off alarm bells in Washington, Brussels, and Kiev this week was that the rhythm went silent. Analysts who monitor Russian military activity know the indicators, the surge in encrypted communications between field commanders and Moscow, the repositioning of strategic reserves that had been held back since last winter, the unusual movement of air defense systems away from established positions, the sudden drawdown of ammunition from secondary depots. All of that went quiet. And whenever the Kremlin goes quiet, it means something is about to get very, very loud. Intelligence officials on both sides of the Atlantic began working around the clock. Satellite imagery was analyzed hourly. Communication intercepts were cross-referenced with human intelligence from sources deep within Russian occupied territories. What emerged was a picture that few wanted to believe, but none could ignore. Russia was preparing a major push, not a gradual advance, not the incremental gains that had characterized the past several months of fighting. This was something larger, something designed to break Ukrainian defenses before winter fully set in, something designed to present the West with a fait accompli. Early Tuesday morning, Pentagon officials detected what they described as significant and unusual military repositioning, including the forward deployment of Tu-95 strategic bombers to airfields that had not been activated in over 18 months. These are the kinds of assets that Russia only deploys when they are signaling something very specific: escalation, intimidation, or preparation for a decisive offensive. NATO observers didn't know which category this fell into or whether it fell into all three at once. But what they did know was that Putin was changing his strategic posture. And when a nuclear armed power shifts posture without explanation, even by a small measure, every intelligence agency in the Western world pays attention. The movement wasn't limited to bombers. Satellite imagery confirmed the repositioning of Iskander missile systems closer to the Ukrainian border. Supply convoys that had been stationary for weeks suddenly began moving eastward. Railroad activity spiked along routes that connect Russian manufacturing centers to the front lines. All the pieces were moving, all of them pointing in one direction. The warning issued by the Pentagon Thursday night was not normal. It was not routine. It was not symbolic. It was urgent. Official after official, in briefing after briefing, described Russia's move as provocative, destabilizing, and perhaps most importantly, operationally significant, meaning this wasn't bluster, this was preparation. Moscow clearly believed that intimidation would work, that the mere threat of escalation would cause Ukraine's Western backers to hesitate, that fear of expansion would paralyze decision-making in Washington and Brussels. But intimidation only works if the target hesitates. Ukraine did not. In fact, their response over the past 72 hours was among the most coordinated and devastating we've seen since the liberation of Kherson. Here's what we know Within hours of confirming Russia's repositioning, Ukrainian forces launched a series of precision strikes that military analysts are still trying to fully assess. These weren't the improvised drone attacks that have characterized much of Ukraine's asymmetric warfare. These were coordinated deep strikes using Western-supplied ATACMS missiles, Storm Shadow cruise missiles, and domestically produced long-range drones, systems that Ukraine only deploys when they are preparing to fundamentally disrupt Russian operations. Tonight, Ukrainian military sources confirmed that their forces launched precision strikes on 17 separate targets across Russian-occupied territory, including a major logistics hub in Crimea that had recently been reinforced for what analysts believe was the planned winter offensive. Ukraine struck before Russia could consolidate. They hit ammunition depots in Luhansk Oblast. They hit command and control centers in Donetsk. They hit fuel storage facilities that were likely preparing to support a major armored push. In other words, Ukraine targeted the nervous system of Russia's planned operation, the infrastructure that would have made it possible, the logistics that would have sustained it. This is what made the Pentagon's warning so urgent. Russia's repositioning wasn't just symbolic. It was actionable. It represented the kind of move that could fundamentally shift the battlefield reality if left unchecked. And Ukraine, understanding that fully, responded with force. Not recklessly, not impulsively, but strategically. They didn't scatter their limited precision munitions across random targets. They didn't waste assets on symbolic strikes. They hit supply lines. They hit communication nodes. They hit the connective tissue that holds a modern military operation together. And when you sever that tissue, even the strongest army begins to bleed. And here's where the story becomes even more significant. Western intelligence officials now believe that Putin's latest move was designed to test the resolve of Ukraine's